Okay, good morning everyone. Shalom Aleichem, Bruchim Habayim. We have amazing material today. Thank you for joining us. We're going to begin with the first shiur of the day. Semuchim miyad. Semuchim miyad. We're connecting the Parsha.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
We're connecting the Parsha to the previous Parsha. Parshas Noach to the end of Bereishis. I want to bring you to today's email, and so we could access the RabbiDG sheets. You could subscribe to our emails. Go to our site, RabbiDG.com, and you could get the emails. If you want to participate in upcoming publications, we have the Ben La'ashri is in the queue. It's Be'ez Hashem going to publication in the next couple of days. But upcoming publications are Chinuch Habanim in English for Art Scroll. We have Davar Yafa Be'itai, connecting the Parsha to the time of the year. Also, there are a number of new language venues. If anybody wants to be mishtatef, that is available. Okay, we're now connecting Parshas Noach to Bereishis. Parshas Noach begins, of course, Ve'ela Toldos Noach. Noach Ish Tzadik, Tamim Haya, B'Dairoisav, Esol Leikim, His Halech Noach. The end of Bereishis is V'Noach Matzah Chen Be'enei Hashem. Noach found favor in the eyes of Hashem. The Ramban explains the reason why Noach found favor in the eyes of Hashem is because all of his actions were correct and pleasant. Like when Moshe found favor in the eyes of Hashem, he says, Ki matzasa chen be'enai v'oedacha b'shem. And like the pasuk says, Vayitein chinoi be'enei sar beis hasayar, or Vatihi Esther noiseis chen be'enei koreyeha. One finds favor if their deeds are deemed appropriate and correct. And this is in contrast to the actions of the people of the generation that saddened Hashem, that aggravated Hashem. On the other hand, Noach found favor in Hashem's eyes. But we don't know yet exactly how did Noach find favor in Hashem's eyes. What was it about his activities, his personality, that found favor in the eyes of Hashem? So Parshas, that's how Bereishis ends. And Parshas Noach explains, he was a tzaddik Tamim, and being a righteous Tamim, that found favor in the eyes of Hashem. In other words, the Ramban himself is telling us the connection between Parshas Bereishis and Parshas Noach. Namely, Bereishis ends that Noach found favor in God's eyes, but we don't know how. So Noach begins by telling us how Noach found favor in the eyes of Hashem. So, along the same lines as the way the Ramban explains, I would humbly suggest another connection. Bereishis ends that Noach found favor in the eyes of Hashem. We don't really know, how does a person find favor in the eyes of Hashem? We know God commanded us to do certain things. We have 613 mitzvahs. Noach had 7 mitzvahs. But what kind of activities find favor in God's eyes? We know that Shlomo Melech says, V'la'anavim yitein chen. God gives grace to the humble. So that means humility finds favor in the eyes of Hashem. Indeed, was Noach humble? The pasuk says, Tamim haya b'dairoisav. Rashi in Avodah Zarah says Tamim means humble and anav. So I would humbly suggest that V'Noach matzah chen, Noach found favor. We know that humility is something that finds favor, and therefore the next pasuk continues, Tamim haya, he was in fact humble. Okay. The next one is a little bit edgy. Maybe a bit controversial, but it is firmly rooted in classic sources. In terms of its applicability, Bizman Hazeh, you have to understand the context and the times that it was said in, but I won't refrain from sharing it with you. Eila Toldos Noach, Noach had 3 sons, Shem, Es, Cham, Yes, Yafes. I have one simple question. Really? He had 3 kids, Shem, Cham, and Yafes? It already said at the end of Bereishis, Vayihi Noach ben Chamesh Me'oi Shana, Vayoyled Noach es Shem es Cham es Yafes. It already said it at the end of Bereishis that he had 3 kids, Shem, Cham, and Yafes. Why does it need to repeat at the beginning of Noach that Noach had 3 sons, Shem, Cham, and Yafes? Every word of the Torah is precise. There are no extra letters, so why repeat the same information? Furthermore, earlier on it just said, Vayoyled Noach es Shem es Cham es Yafes. Why now does it say Shloisha Banim? Why the first time it just says their names, and this time not only does it say their names, it adds them up, 3 boys. So I want to explain based on something the Chida brings in the name of his great-great-grandfather. The end of Bereishis, when it talks about the plummet of society, it says, Vayihi ki heichel ha'adam laroiv al pnei ha'adama ubanois yuldu lahem. And it was when man began to proliferate on the face of the earth, and they had daughters. And then the rest is history. God saw the evil of mankind. God saw the men were just taking whatever daughters they wanted. But it almost sounds like, you know what triggered the downfall of man? All of a sudden, when man began to proliferate and they had a lot of daughters, the excess of daughters caused this plummet in society. Okay? So now we come to something that's, the Chida brings that there's a tradition, and nobody is trying to make the case that this is a politically correct approach, but this is the approach that the Chida brings from classic sources. Vayivoled Noach shloisha banim. He brings from an early source the Kasnaisar. Noach was a tzaddik. He had 3 sons. He brings from the Chesed LaAvram that a person is only a tzaddik if they guard the sanctity of the bris milah. Okay? The Medrash says, Vayihi ki heichel adam laroiv al pnei adama ubanois yaldu lahem, that because they were promiscuous in guarding the ois bris kodesh, and they were shoifech their zera on eitzim va'avanim, therefore they were given, they had daughters and not sons, which means, according to the Medrash, Ubanos Yoldu Lahem, is that the fact that they had daughters in excess, the fact that they had a very large proliferation of daughters specifically, was symptomatic of their promiscuity. This is what the Chesed LaAvram brings from a Medrash, and therefore the remez is Noach ish tzaddik tamim. He was a tzaddik tamim, and therefore, being a tzaddik tamim, Noach had 3 sons and not daughters. This is a raya, he guarded his bris milah. In other words, the fact that the rest of society was conducting themselves in a lewd manner, therefore, the Medrash says, God gave them an excess and a proliferation of specifically daughters, but Noach, who preserved his Kedusha, had sons only. Okay, the Chida asks on this, really? Only a tzaddik only has sons and not daughters? We see many, many Gedolei Olam that had only daughters, namely Rashi. Rashi, who is our Rebbe and our father, and the greatest teacher of Klal Yisrael, he had only daughters. Also, the lashon of the Medrash is la roiv al pnei ha'adama, that they were mashpech zaram on eitzim le'avanim. That doesn't mean that somebody who's a tzaddik will have only boys and not daughters. The Medrash implies it was the extra proliferation of predominantly daughters. To which the Chida explains that it's true a tzaddik can have boys and girls. But the symptom is only a excessive proliferation of daughters. It could be, the Chida suggests, that by Noach, that the whole world sinned in promiscuity, so to show his righteousness and his purity, Hashem made it that he had only sons, so to speak, as a sign for that generation. But throughout history, most tzaddikim have banim and banos. By the way, it could be the whole thing is symbolic, because the Meiri says that there's a difference between, it's not a matter of banim and banos, it's a matter of whether people have a giving nature or a receiving nature, and that would make the whole thing not relevant. But in any event, there's also another interesting sefer that called Ma'ira Shel Torah, that he brings, that the ancient naturalists would say that in lands that people marry only one woman, then the male and female population are equal. In places where people have multiple wives, they tend to give birth to more females than males. So, based on that, because in the generation of the flood they were having many wives, they specifically had many daughters. But Noach, who remained faithful to one wife, he had only sons. In any event, the Hemshech HaPsukim could be explained as follows. That when man began to proliferate on the earth, and they had many, many daughters, which that indicated that they were loose in matters of arayos, so Hashem said, I can't tolerate it anymore. God saw their evil, but Noach found favor in Hashem's eyes. How do we see that Noach found favor in Hashem's eyes? Because obviously Noach was pure in matters of immorality, indicated by the fact that Hashem gave his family only banim v'loy banos. So, in the Sefer Mamleches Kohanim, he brings that this would answer all of our questions. We asked, it already said that Noach had 3 sons. Why does it have to repeat that Noach had Shem, Cham, and Yafes? Also, why does it say here, banim, shloisha banim? The answer is, the point is not to teach us who Noach's children were. We know who Noach's children were. In the context of explaining why Noach was matzah chen b'nei Hashem, it wanted to tell us that, look, he had banim, but v'loy banos. Okay, that it was a perush based on the ideas that the Chida brings down from his great-great-grandfather, and you could, contemplate that over Shabbos. We also find V'noach matzah chen b'nei Hashem. We already brought that the midah that finds favor in the eyes of Hashem is humility. Now, here's another thing we know, that humility brings to fear of God. Like it says, how do we know that humility brings to fear of God? It says, Ekev anava yiras Hashem. On the heels of humility is fear of God. In fact, the Targum says, Es ho'elokim hishalech Noach, b'dachalta d'Hashem haloich Noach. That Noach had fear of God. So the flow of the Parshas are, Noach found favor. If he found favor, that means he's humble. If he's humble, then he probably has Yiras Shamayim, which is the opening of the Parsha, Es ho'elokim hishalech Noach. Another idea, that if Noach found favor, then he must have been humble. V'noach matzah chen. Matzah is gematria 131.
141. No, 131.
131. And some say the word matzah, anav, is gematria 131. It happens not to be, but if the word anav is spelled without a yud, usually you could spell anav without a yud. So very often it is spelled without a yud. Then it's only off by one. So in some svarim they bring that the word matzah is gematria anav, and in the Sefer Bnei Shushan, he brings from a Sefer Divrei Mordechai, the word Elah is a remez to the Shechina. Elah is the oisios Leah. Leah is always a remez to the Shechina. Now we know that someone has humility becomes the chariot of the Shechina. So the pasuk says, Noach matzah chen be'inei Hashem. We already said if he found favor, he must have been humble. Matzah is gematria anav. If he was humble, he becomes a chariot of Elah, of the Shechina. That's the connection. V'noach matzah chen ve'Elah toldos Noach. Now this is a very interesting one. From a Sefer Vayikach Yaakov Evan. He says, there's a Gemara between Rav Nachman and Rabbi Yitzchak. Rav Nachman and Rabbi Yitzchak, when they took leave of each other, so one said to the other, will the master give me a bracha? He said, give you a bracha? You know what you're like? Like somebody going through a desert. He's hungry, he's tired, he's thirsty. He finds a tree with sweet fruit, pleasant shade, and a river of water flowing underneath. He eats from the fruit, he drinks the water, he sits in the shade. When he wants to get up, he says, Ilan, Ilan, Bama avarechecha. He says, tree, what bracha can I give you? I should say that you should have sweet fruits. You have sweet fruits. I should say that your shade should be pleasant. Your shade is pleasant. I should say that there should be water passing underneath you. There is. Yehiratzain, that all the plantings that I plant from you should be like you. So too, Rav Nachman says to Rabbi Yitzchak, I should give you a bracha in Torah, you have Torah. Wealth, you have wealth. Children, you have children. But my bracha is all your children should be like you. So what do we see from here? From here we see that when you see somebody who's going in the right path, so we have to give them a bracha, that their children should be like them. So too with Noach. Noach was matzah chen be'inei Hashem. So we need to give him a bracha. What's the bracha? The bracha is, ve'ela toldos Noach. Noach ish tzaddik, tamim haya v'dairosav. We say, Noach, all your children should follow in your path and should be like you. Okay. Then if you see on the sheet over here, here are some connections from the Sefer Semuchim La'ad of Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. You could take a look at that on your own time. And in terms of the name of the Sefer, Semuchim Miyad, so many wanted to say Semuchim Miyad is Semuchim, juxtaposition, Miyad, Me'es, Daniel Yaakov, which is my name. That's where the name comes from. Okay, that's the obvious connection, but you still have some work to do. Okay, there's more to it. Okay, and we will continue from here.